From quarterback to president of football, Matt Ryan will hopefully lead the Falcons into a much brighter future.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Falcons, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in the galaxy. And of course, today's Locked On Falcons is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. So, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades. Formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong, entering year 10, or we've entered year 10. We're about, month and a half into year 10 as the humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on today's daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we'll be talking about the timeline for the Falcons' ongoing GM and head coaching search and hires. Who are some of the front runners? Who are some of the candidates? Give you an overview and update on that. We'll talk about Matt LaFleur, the Green Bay Packers head coach. And after the choke job he pulled in the playoffs, could he become available for the Atlanta Falcons and how that may go down? But we got to start off talking about the big news this weekend. Matt Ryan, officially on Saturday, was named president of football, not football operations. The official title is the president of football. Football in Atlanta, football in America, football in the entire world. We hope so someday soon. But the legend has returned, right? This is news that we've been expecting for basically the last week. It's been widely reported that Matt Ryan was the front runner. They created this job specifically to hire Matt Ryan, but the Falcons did their due diligence, interviewing 5 guys, including Matt Ryan. But hopefully this begins a brand new era of Falcons football. Hopefully a continued success, right? Matt Ryan, as a quarterback in 2008, sparked the Falcons' most successful era of football over the 14 years that he played in Atlanta. And hopefully, we'll get a similar return. 14 years of even greater success, greater heights than what we saw from Matt Ryan as a player. As you guys well know, when this news was first rumored that the Falcons were eyeing Matt Ryan for a significant front office role, I was very skeptical, right? I'm still skeptical, but not to the same degree that I was, right? And this move has kind of been growing on me. Now, part of that has been we're getting a little bit more clarity on what that significant front office role was, being the president of football in the entire galaxy, right? But as we found out, that role is not necessarily a football forward role, even though he is the president of football, right? It's more about, accountability, right? It's basically Arthur Blank kind of passing the buck to someone else in the organization to kind of run the football side of things. And he couldn't do that to Rich McKay because Rich McKay is very unpopular. So he decided, you know what? No one really likes the people in this building. So let's hire somebody that most people like. I say most people. I won't say everybody, because every time I talk about Matt Ryan on this podcast, there's like one knucklehead in the comments. We're like, Matt Ryan, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, my guy, you're still mad about Matt Ryan? Okay, fine. But, that's why I say most people, right? There's always, some lizard people in the comments that are, still hating on Matt Ryan to this day. But my hope for the Matt Ryan move is that because Matt Ryan's time as a quarterback, right? We know he was very much a perfectionist when it came to, we got to get the play right, get effing set, all that stuff that we know Matt Ryan to be of, you got to be here and run this route and all that stuff. And I hope he brings that sort of mentality to being the president of football, right, in the solar system. Because, and then you couple that with him being a outsider in the sense of he's not in the building. He's coming from outside the building, even though he's been, adjacent to the building, these last couple of years since his retirement, since reconciliation after his, unheralded departure back in 2022. And my hope is that those two factors mean that Matt Ryan's going to come into this building with much fresher eyes than someone else that's already been in the building that would essentially, like a Terry Fontaine, like a Rich McKay, convince themselves that, oh, like the Falcons are already good. We've already built a great roster, right? You've heard me rant about this dozens of times now since the end of the season, throughout the season, that there's an air of complacency that surrounds this team that I think holds this team back. As I explained last week on the podcast, the analogy being like this team believes they're 80% up the mountaintop, and so they only put in 20% of the work that they need to reach the summit of the mountain, as opposed to the reality, which is this team is closer to like 40, 50, 60%, whatever, up the mountaintop, and they need to put in 40, 50, 60% of the work in order to reach the top of the mountain. And my hope is that because Matt Ryan is not in the building and is not going to sit here and look at this Falcons roster and be like, I've built this roster like Terry Fontenot, like Rich McKay, like Thomas Dimitroff have in previous years, which, this era of complacency has been a problem for the Falcons to me for the last 15 to 20 years. That's going to be a part of it. And then that perfectionist mindset is going to be the anti-complacency, where it's not like, oh, like we're not good enough, right? Even though we won 10, 11 games last year, we want to win 13, 14 games. And so we're going to put in the effort to do that. And I hope that's why, to me, this hire is growing on me as this process has unfolded. And I'm hoping for that for Matt Ryan, that because he's not going to necessarily be making football decisions, but he's going to be sort of overseeing football decisions, having accountability. He's going to be the sort of catalyst to drive the people that are going to be making those football decisions, the head coach, the general manager, to push forward, to not necessarily look at their success. And we use air quotes to say success because winning 7 or 8 games for 7 of the last 8 years, with the one exception being you won 4 games, is not success. It's mediocrity. And hopefully, again, that's why I'm coming around on the Matt Ryan being the president of football, in the universe. Okay. So hopefully we will see that. But, this is step 1 of a multi-step process. And hopefully the Falcons won't just simply like, oh, we hired Matt Ryan, so all of our problems go away. And it's like, no, my guy. But that will be an ongoing conversation as we get geared up between now and March. What are exactly the Falcons' problems? But we're not going to get into that on today's episode. Instead, we're going to talk about, Matt Ryan's former quarterback coach and Matt LaFleur, right? And he's on potentially the hot seat given the choke job the Packers did this past weekend in the playoffs. And if he is, potentially the next head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. So it's finally time we talk about Matt LaFleur returning to Atlanta as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, right? This time of year, we're all starting new routines or trying to restart old routines. And it can be a challenge starting these new routines. You may look at player projections as, a challenge and a new thing, but it's easy with FanDuel, right? They're the place that's going to make it feel good to be right because, this time of year, not only are people starting new routines, but we got high pressure football matchups every weekend, elite hoops action almost every single night. So the action never slows down, and FanDuel is going to keep you in control of that action because they are the daily fantasy app that's going to let you build lineups based off of player stat projections. Just you versus the projections, no drafts, no waiting. Just pick more or less and play your way, and you can play so many different ways, whether you're looking at a unique range of stats like yards, fantasy score, three-pointers, whatever fits your strategy. So check it out by downloading the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it is good to be right. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood Prediction Markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood Prediction Markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when the momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Deliveries, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Now, guys, thank you to all of you that are everydayers of this podcast. We thank you because you are the reason why Locked On is now the number one sports podcast network in the galaxy. Got to share the space with Matt Ryan, who's the president of football in the galaxy. And, if you want to level up your everydayer, right? All you got to do is join the Everydayer Club, something we've launched recently on Locked On. You get a lot of perks, ad-free version of Locked On Falcons, Discord access, and you get some fine Locked On merch, whatever you're into. Check it out at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. $5 a month, $50 a year. So if you want to level up, go check it out in the link in the description below. So let's talk about Matt LaFleur, current Green Bay Packers head coach. Maybe by the time you guys are listening, he's the former Green Bay Packers head coach because the Packers just blew a lead. And, that makes him the perfect Atlanta Falcons head coach. Like, you got to level up your blown leads, Matt. They just blew a 18-point halftime lead to the Bears, 15-point fourth quarter lead to the Bears. It's like, we can do better than that, Matt. Come on, no, it's Atlanta Falcons, 25. Like we can get better than a 15-point blown lead. But there was midseason speculation, especially during that stretch when they had just lost to the Panthers and lost to the Eagles, and there was a lot of talk at that point in time, like, Matt LaFleur could be on the hot seat. And I remember a lot of Falcon fans at that time, it was the same time where the Falcons were on the middle of their, 4 or 5 game losing streak in the middle of the season. There was a lot of speculation about, if Matt LaFleur becomes available, he'll be the number one guy for the Falcons. And at that time, I was just like, let's wait and see how the rest of the season plays out. I hate sitting here in week 7, people speculating at the end of the season. And basically now I'm just saying as a preamble, now we're here at the point where it's like it's worthwhile speculating a little bit more because Matt LaFleur getting fired is much more realistic today than it was then. He's entering a contract year. There's been lots of talk about will they extend him. He was going into the game looking for that extension. I saw a lot of tweets, at halftime being like, hey, give Matt LaFleur whatever he wants when they were up 21-3, and then we saw how that all went. And, because he's under contract for one more year through the 2026 season, I do wonder if the Packers, instead of firing him, would be much more open to trading him to a team like the Falcons or whoever else would be interested in him, as I'm sure a number of teams would be, as a way to potentially recoup the draft capital that they lost in the Micah Parsons trade. So if they are going to move on from Matt LaFleur, it's the old Denzel, Terry Fontenot, I'm leaving here with something. So we'll see if that's the route that they go. But, when we talk about Matt LaFleur, let's hypothetically talk about his potential, assuming he'll be available, which I don't think is a safe assumption, at least as of this recording. But again, history tells you that the minute I get off this podcast, stop recording this podcast, news will break or something like that. But, I really think Matt LaFleur is a really good play caller. I think that's reflected in how well his quarterbacks have played, Jordan Love and Malik Willis, who I think are capable quarterbacks, but I don't think, the stats are really impressive when you look at both of those guys. And I don't think that's a reflection of how good those quarterbacks is. I think that's more a reflection of, Matt LaFleur putting his quarterback in a position to succeed. But at the same time, even though I think Matt LaFleur is a very good play caller, as a head coach, there's a little bit of bozo in him, as there often is with a lot of head coaches, which is, prompting a lot of this speculation for the Packers to move on, 3 straight years of 7 seeds, not being able to advance past the second round of the playoffs in those years. The Bears lost, bozo, right? Losing games earlier this season to the Browns and Panthers, bozo, right? Just too many games like that, right? The Packers were my Super Bowl pick heading into this season. I had them winning like 13 games. They only win 9.5. So underachieving. And so that's certainly the knock on Matt LaFleur, which is prompting the Packers to move on. It's like, we can do better than this. We expect more here in Titletown than, this. In Atlanta, was like, hey, 9-8, 7 seeds. We'll take that all day, but we'll sort of have to see. And so I think when you look at Matt LaFleur, the case for hiring him, and again, if he becomes available, we can do a deeper dive into it. But this is just kind of spitballing a little bit. But, because you consider him to be a really good play caller, and that being a significant upgrade to what the Falcons have seen these last 5 years, especially in terms of the play calling. 7 years, Derek Cutter, 8 years, Steve Sarkisian. We're not going to go back, right? You're hoping that you get a massive upgrade in play calling, and you're hoping that the bozo stuff is like some of that's related to the narrative that I've heard from various Packers fans that because Green Bay is relatively a cheap organization because they don't have a billionaire owning the franchise like so many other NFL teams do, including the Atlanta Falcons, they tend to be cheaper. And that has led to him having one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, assistant coaching staff, right? And so that you could imagine a scenario where Matt LaFleur goes to a town like Atlanta with an owner that's very willing to spend, that will be like, hey, man, here, you can go max out the credit card and build you an elite coaching staff, to a support system around you that can help eliminate some of the bozo stuff, because where you're deficient in when it comes to game management and some of this stuff, we can bring in assistance that can allow you to maybe take that off your plate or just be more effective in your usage there. And so that's kind of the hope for Matt LaFleur in Atlanta. We'll see if he becomes available. Obviously, as I mentioned before, you do have that connection between Matt LaFleur and Matt Ryan, given that Matt LaFleur is part of that Dan Quinn coaching staff under Kyle Shanahan, or really that Kyle Shanahan offensive coaching staff, where Kyle Shanahan, with the exception of Raheem Morris, had responsibility for pretty much all the offensive coaches, and Matt LaFleur was the quarterbacks coach for the Falcons in 2015 and 2016, including Matt Ryan's MVP year. So that is something that if he does become available, you do have to imagine he could potentially shoot to the top of the list for the Atlanta Falcons. And we'll just have to wait and see if he does become available. As of this recording on Sunday around 7 p.m. Eastern time, he has not become available, or just before 7 p.m. Eastern time, because we'll see. Again, I know the minute I get off this podcast, there will be breaking news. But, we'll see on that front. But let's wrap up today's episode talking about, someone who is probably at the top of the list for the Falcons as far as general manager goes. That comes from Bears assistant GM Ian Cunningham. Why it seems like, similar to Matt Ryan's hiring, it seems like Ian Cunningham is an inevitable hire as the Falcons GM, but we'll talk about that. That will be our sort of starting point to talk about sort of what's the timeline for when we could hear the Falcons hiring a GM and filling that head coaching vacancy to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Since the wild card round is here and wrapping up as we speak, FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in the action, because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets that you like most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply, and those boosts let you lean into your game day instincts. Whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback, or coaching, the boosts are going to give you more juice on the bets that you already like, instead of forcing you to bet on something new that you don't like. So make your picks, then apply your profit boost, and go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Have your health or family needs changed lately? Well, don't worry. Georgia's got you covered. Georgia Access is our state's marketplace for Georgians to compare, apply, and enroll in health insurance plans that offer the best value for their individual needs. Open enrollment is happening right now. Time is ticking, ladies and gentlemen. January 15th, 2026. You got to go visit georgiaaccess.gov today to make sure that you are covered. Georgia Access, health insurance for Georgia by Georgia. So it seems more and more like Ian Cunningham is inevitably going to be the Falcons' new general manager, taking over for Terry Fontenot. He's been speculated from the jump by many to be the front runner, given the Ryan Poles connection between him and Matt Ryan. For those of you that are not familiar, Ryan Poles was an offensive lineman blocking for Matt Ryan at Boston College. Ryan was in his wedding. I don't, I've heard that he was a groomsman. I've heard he's the best man. I don't know quite the details, but he was in the wedding. Okay. And so that tells you Matt Ryan and Ryan Poles are very close. And obviously, I'm sure Ryan Poles has been basically, hey, I got my guy, my assistant GM, Ian here. He's ready to go. He's the guy you want. And we've talked before about Ian Cunningham's background as a Ravens and Eagles guy, as well as his time in the Bears, means that he's going to be more of a daddy-driven GM that's going to be willing to trade back as opposed to trade up, unlike Terry Fontenot. So he's the polar opposite of Terry Fontenot, which, if you've been an everyday of this podcast, we love here on this podcast because we don't negotiate with terrorists. But, every day is not that reference. But, it'll be interesting to see whether or not the Falcons interview more GM candidates, right? Because they interviewed 4 guys in addition to Matt Ryan, including Ian Cunningham, for the president of football, on the continent. And, there were reports that came out after those interviews were conducted on Thursday and Friday of this past week that those interviews essentially doubled as GM interviews. Now, to me, that's notable because of those 4 other guys, other than, the eventual president of football, in the Northern Hemisphere, in Matt Ryan, only 2 of those 4 president of football interviews had guys come in the building that had scouting backgrounds. One was Ian Cunningham. The other one was Josh Williams from the 49ers. And Josh Williams, as far as I know, unless his current role with the 49ers is much different than what I think it is, has never run a scouting department before, right? So Ian Cunningham's really the only person as an assistant GM and whatnot, and former director of scouting and whatnot, that has actually run a scouting department, which I'm assuming is what the Falcons are looking for in a GM, a guy to make football decisions, as opposed to the other 2 candidates, Mike Disner and Brant Tillis, who are much more cap gurus, business guys, numbers guys, than necessarily the football evaluators, right? And then when you couple that with Josh Williams, again, not running a scouting department, but just like 2 years removed from being a national scout, by process elimination, if you're looking at these 4 guys, again, assuming that the Falcons are looking for much more of a, scout evaluator to run the scouting department, to run the front office and the personnel department, Ian Cunningham is the only legit candidate of these president of football / GM candidates. And so that's why we sit here, we go like, even despite the rumors, even if those rumors that, Ian Cunningham is the front runner that have been, I won't say rampant, but pervasive over the last, 7 to 10 days, even if they didn't exist, you could just by process of elimination be like, yeah, that clearly is the guy that they want to be the GM. That's the guy that's most qualified, and they haven't really brought in anybody else that's more qualified than him. And so it'll be interesting to see if they try to do that, right? And so because of that, and it doesn't seem like the Falcons are interested in doing that, and there's reasons for that, but we can get into that maybe later this week, depending on what happens. But it just feels like now it's a matter of time before Ian Cunningham is named GM. But I don't think that move can be official until the Bears are eliminated from the playoffs. But basically what I'm sitting here saying is, as I'm sitting here on Sunday, if we don't hear any news that the Falcons are requesting more interviews for additional GM candidates in the next 48 hours, it just seems to kind of confirm my suspicions that, it's Ian Cunningham all the way, and we're just, waiting for the opportune time to announce that when the Bears season is over. And so if that is the case, it suggests that the Falcons aren't going to necessarily beat the allegations that this has been kind of arranged from the jump between Matt Ryan and Ian Cunningham, going back to that point of like people connecting those dots of like Matt Ryan knows Ryan Poles knows Ian Cunningham. It's, a match made in heaven. And it makes you wonder if basically, there's been various reports of Matt Ryan, having assembled a list of candidates for months, right? Or weeks. I don't know the exact verbiage of the various tweets. But, it does sound like, this has been a plan in the making for the Falcons. And, it was like, weeks or months ago, the Falcons were like, we need to bring in a president of football. Every time I say that, guys, like all I can think of is President Business from the Lego movie. It's the thing that goes through my head. I'm like, it's not President Business, it's President Football. So if yeah, we'll see how silly I get as the offseason. Different ways I can describe the president of football. More ridiculous and more ridiculous, as you guys know I am. But it does at least suggest that the Falcons, if Matt Ryan had basically come up with a list, it's like, okay, well, here's my GM. Here's the guy I want to be the GM. But, we'll go through the process, even though it's a sham process. And so you wonder, like, is the head coach, does that also apply to the head coaching search? And it's like, did Matt Ryan already have a candidate? And who is that candidate? And I guess we'll find out. But speaking of that head coaching search, because I'm not expecting the Falcons to bring in more GM candidates, it does feel like that they will just kind of spend the next 2 weeks potentially just interviewing head coaches. We'll see if that changes. So far we've had 4 interviews. They started those interviews on Saturday after Matt Ryan was officially hired, right? Seemed like that was the plan from the jump. Get the president of football, in the Western Hemisphere, in the building, and then they could proceed to make these hires, and Matt Ryan's going to have considerable influence. Obviously, Arthur Blank is going to have final say, final approval on that, but, Matt Ryan's probably going to get his choice of guy in that room. So far, they've interviewed 4 candidates as of this recording. Anthony Weaver, Dolphins defensive coordinator; Clint Kubiak, Seahawks offensive coordinator; Aiden Durde, Seahawks defensive coordinator. All those happened on Saturday. Kevin Stefanski, the ex-Browns head coach, interviewed on Sunday morning. They've requested 4 more guys that are potentially on the docket. Vance Joseph, Broncos defensive coordinator. And I'm assuming Vance Joseph is being interviewed as I'm recording this Sunday evening, just because he's on a bye and you need to get that interview done before the end of this weekend if you want to get that interview done. So I'm sure that will probably get announced at some point soon. Robert Saleh, 49ers defensive coordinator. Jeff Hafley, Packers defensive coordinator. And Ejiro Evero, with that request coming in Sunday, the Panthers defensive coordinator. And so the rest of those interviews of the requested players besides Vance Joseph should start happening, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. And it's notable that, the Falcons have overwhelmingly, at least in this first round of requests and interviews, when we're talking about 8 guys, 6 of those 8 guys are defensive guys, right? Even though there's rampant speculation that the Falcons may be targeting an offensive guy, right? Some of that speculation is based off of the idea that the Falcons blocked Jeff Ulbrich from interviewing for a defensive coordinator job in Dallas, but did not block Zach Robinson from interviewing for an offensive coordinator job in Tampa Bay, which makes it, the assumption is the Falcons want an offensive guy so that they can pair him with Jeff Ulbrich and continue building up this defense. Fair speculation, but at the same time, I just think it's because the Falcons think Jeff Ulbrich is worth keeping, and they don't think Zach Robinson is worth keeping. It ain't deeper than that. But, it is worthwhile, is notable that, if that is the potential plan of the Falcons bringing in an offensive guy, that they've primarily started with defensive guys. And you wonder if this is all, scripted from the beginning, like, is this all part of the script? So we'll just be curious to see how it all plays out. But, I would not expect a head coach hire anytime soon. Maybe I'm wrong. And again, that's part of the script. But I expect a similar timeline as we got back in 2024 when the Falcons hired Raheem Morris. They hired him on January 25th. That's probably around the time where I would start to think that that's when the Falcons will hire their guy sometime around then. It was a 14-day process in that 2024 hiring cycle between their first interview and when they hired Raheem Morris. That first week was spent, those first 7 days were spent with those first round of interviews with several candidates. And then the second week, they had a couple more first interviews that they sort of threw out there, but primarily it was getting to the second interviews. And that's kind of what I'm expecting. I'm expecting to see the Falcons interview a bunch of guys over the course of the week, this week. And then they'll kind of narrow down their list to a couple of, prime second candidates the following week. And then we'll get, a hire sometime around, January 25th or something like that. So we'll see on that front. But that's going to do it for us, guys, on today's episode. Just catching you up on the news, announcing the new president of football. I got nothing else, in the Eastern time zone. I got, Is that going to get old very quickly? I'm sure some of you are like, Aaron, it got old, 30 minutes ago. But we're going to keep, you know me, I love to run a joke into the ground. But that's going to do it for us, guys. Tomorrow we'll probably talk a little bit more about one of those offensive candidates in terms of Clint Kubiak, because he's been kind of speculated to be the Ian Cunningham of the head coaching search, who is a potential front runner there. So that will probably be something that we'll get into tomorrow, as well as we'll figure out what other coaching candidates we'll do a deeper dive on and catch up on whatever news that we need to catch up. And then later this week, we'll have some guests on. We'll get to the all-pro stuff, I think, probably either Tuesday or Wednesday. We got 4 all-pros for the Falcons, 1 first team, 3 second team guys. Talk about that a little bit later this week as well. So that's all in store for you guys this week here on Locked On Falcons. Appreciate you. We'll keep you, abreast of all the head coach and GM shenanigans here in Atlanta, and we'll see this process. That's part of the reason why, we're not sitting here going oh my God, this is it. This is going to probably be a 2-week process, so we're not in any rush to get through all these things as these things go forward. So that's what's in store for you coming up on future episodes of Locked On Falcons. Check out Locked On NFL if you want to get the scoop on all the playoff action, as well as the NFL news you missed this weekend. And of course, go check out the Everydayer Club if you're looking to level up your everydayerness. Again, ad-free version of Locked On Falcons, exclusive Locked On Podcast Network, Discord access, and of course, you get a little merch. You can check out a little Locked On Podcast merch. So go check that out at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. $5 a month, $50 a year is all it takes to become a member of the Everydayer Club. So go check it out, guys. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every